I never thought I'd be standing in the lobby of my own family's hotel, feeling like a stranger in the very place I'd saved. The polished marble floors gleamed under the morning light, and the scent of pine wood from the freshly renovated walls still lingered in the air, the scent of my work, my devotion. Yet somehow the atmosphere felt colder than ever. Mom's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Claire, honey, your brother just has more natural leadership ability. You're too detail-oriented." The words came out sweet polite, but they carried that old familiar poison, the same tone she'd used all my life when turning my accomplishments into inconveniences. And then, like clockwork, Ryan appeared, hands in his pockets, wearing that self-satisfied smirk that had haunted me since childhood. "Hey, sis," he said lightly, as if this wasn't a battlefield. "Don't take it personally. Someone's got to handle the day-to-day stuff while I focus on the bigger picture." I stood frozen, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out the hum of the lobby. The bigger picture. The only picture here was the one I had spent 8 months fighting to restore, the hotel that had been rotting under years of neglect until I came home and gave it a second life. My name is Claire Anderson, and I'm 52 years old. I spent more than 2 decades managing luxury hotels in Chicago, living, breathing, and mastering hospitality. Yet now I was being told by my own mother that I wasn't fit to run the family business. The irony burned. Because 8 months ago I had sold my condo, cashed in my savings, and left everything behind to rescue this place, their dream, our legacy. I can still remember the call from my father. His voice was cracked with shame. "Claire, the bank's weeks away from closing in. We might lose the Mountain Pine Lodge." I didn't hesitate. I didn't think twice. I packed my life into 2 suitcases and drove back to Colorado. When I first walked through those doors again, my heart broke. The once grand lodge my grandparents built in 1971 looked like a relic of a forgotten decade, faded carpets, flickering lights, lifeless staff. The online reviews were humiliating, stuck in the past. Not worth the price. Smells like dust and disappointment. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. Every night I was here, sometimes until 3 a.m., hunched over spreadsheets, training new staff and begging suppliers for discounts. I replaced the lobby furniture, modernized the reservation system, redesigned the rooms, and even convinced a travel magazine to feature us as Colorado's hidden gem. It wasn't just work, it was resurrection. And when the bookings doubled, when guests started smiling again, when the lobby echoed with laughter instead of silence, I thought, this is it. Finally, they'll see my worth. But that morning, standing under the chandeliers I'd chosen, watching my mother hand the keys to Ryan, I realized none of it mattered. They had already decided. The staff meeting was scheduled for that evening, the same meeting where I was supposed to present our record-breaking quarterly results. Instead, it would become Ryan's coronation. The thought made my stomach twist. As I looked around the lobby, my eyes met Sarah's, our head housekeeper, a loyal woman who had been here 20 years. The sympathy in her expression almost broke me. She knew, everyone knew, and still they had to stand there smiling politely, pretending this was normal. I wanted to scream, but instead I smiled. Because that's what you do in this family, you swallow the fire. Let me take you back so you understand why this moment cut so deep. The Mountain Pine Lodge wasn't just a hotel. It was the cradle of my childhood. I learned to fold towels before I learned algebra. While other kids were watching cartoons, I was behind the reception desk, helping Mom check in, guests watching Dad patch up broken heaters in the middle of winter. This building, these halls raised me, but Ryan, he was different. 3 years younger, always the golden boy. He drifted from one hobby to another like a kite without a string. First, he wanted to be an architect, then a filmmaker, then a businessman, until he dropped out of college entirely to find himself. And my parents, they applauded it. "He's just creative," Mom would say. "He needs time to figure things out." Meanwhile, I was the boring one, the one who had figured things out too soon. While I was building a career in Chicago, climbing from front desk manager to regional director, my mother's phone calls were never proud, only probing. "When are you coming home? When are you getting married?" My achievements were treated like distractions from what truly mattered to her. The family, the lodge, Ryan. So when Dad called me crying, saying they were weeks away from losing everything, I thought maybe finally my time had come. The first few weeks after I returned were chaos. The pipes burst, the Wi-Fi crashed daily, the old staff were unmotivated and exhausted. I became a one-woman army. I remember standing alone in the lobby at 2 a.m., surrounded by half-assembled furniture, the air thick with dust, my hands blistered from lifting boxes. And yet even then I felt alive, because I believed I was saving something sacred, not just a business, but my family's story. Every penny I spent was carefully calculated. Every new hire, every upgrade, every marketing campaign, it was a step toward rebirth. And Ryan, he was in Denver, networking, he said, which really meant posting photos of cocktail bars and ski trips with his friends. He'd show up once a month, throw around vague suggestions. We should modernize our image, maybe do something with influencers and then vanish again. But somehow in my parents' eyes, his empty ideas equaled my sleepless nights. I kept telling myself it would change, that once they saw the profit, the reviews, the numbers, they'd finally recognize who had done the real work. How naive I was. The last 3 weeks have been a living nightmare. Ryan has strutted around the hotel like a peacock, making reckless changes he doesn't even understand. He cut our continental breakfast service, one of our biggest guest draws, because it's not modern enough. When I showed him the data proving it was a bad move, he laughed. Numbers aren't everything, sis. Gotta think bigger. And then this morning, he crossed a line I can never forgive. I walked into the housekeeping office and found him firing Maria, our head of housekeeping, the woman who had kept this place running through every storm. His reason, she's not flexible enough with my new scheduling system. His system would have left us understaffed during peak hours. I stood there speechless, watching Maria's eyes fill with humiliation. I managed to stop him before the papers were signed, but the damage was done. That night I went home and stared at the ceiling, my chest burning with anger. I had done everything to earn their trust, and still they chose him. The next morning something inside me shifted. Maybe it broke. Maybe it finally woke up. On my drive home, I passed by a weathered sign on the edge of town for sale, the Riverside Lodge. Our old competitor, once elegant, now abandoned. I pulled over. The building stood half hidden behind a line of fir trees, its windows dusty but full of potential. Better location, closer to the ski slopes, stunning mountain views. I sat in my car for an hour thinking about every time my parents had brushed me aside. Every time Ryan had smirked. Every time I had begged for recognition that never came. And then I did something I'd never done before. I stopped waiting for permission. Right there in the parking lot, I called my realtor. By the time I drove home, I had already scheduled a viewing. For the first time in months, my heart was racing, not from anger but from purpose. If my family wanted to hand my life's work to someone who didn't deserve it, then fine. I'd build something that was mine. And this time, they would have to watch as I succeeded without them. The next morning, I stood in front of the Riverside Lodge with a mix of fear and exhilaration pulsing through my veins. The early sunlight hit the faded wood panels, revealing decades of neglect, cracked windows, chipped paint, and a sign so weather-worn you could barely read the name. But beneath the decay, I saw something else: possibility. I walked through the silent lobby, my footsteps echoing off the dusty floorboards. The air smelled of old pine and forgotten summers. To anyone else, it looked like a ruin. To me, it was a blank canvas, my chance to start over, my chance to prove to myself that I didn't need anyone's approval to build something extraordinary. The realtor followed behind nervously, trying to make small talk. "It'll take a lot of work," she warned. I smiled. "Good. I'm not afraid of work." Within a week, I had signed the papers. The Riverside Lodge was mine, and for the first time in years, I felt alive. I renamed it the Summit, because that's where I intended to go, higher than I'd ever been, higher than the family who had overlooked me. It wasn't just a hotel anymore. It was my declaration, my independence, my quiet revenge. The months that followed were a blur of noise, sweat, and determination. I worked side by side with contractors, hauling boxes, choosing fabrics, repainting rooms until midnight. I replaced everything from the plumbing to the lighting, blending rustic mountain charm with sleek, modern elegance. Each decision felt personal, like stitching pieces of myself into the walls. When exhaustion threatened to break me, I'd look out at the mountain peaks and remind myself why I started. This wasn't about destroying anyone. It was about reclaiming my worth, something I'd spent my whole life giving away. Meanwhile, Ryan was busy turning Mountain Pine Lodge into a joke. Word spread quickly through town he was hosting networking parties in the lounge, serving cheap champagne and bragging about his vision. Guests complained about delays, cleanliness, poor service, things that had never been problems before. The same staff who had once been loyal to me were now exhausted and demoralized. I heard whispers from former employees that Ryan dismissed their feedback, called them old-fashioned, and replaced experienced workers with his friends from Denver who barely showed up on time. It was painful to hear, but part of me couldn't help feeling vindicated. Mom tried to guilt-trip me, of course. During one of our rare family dinners, she sighed dramatically. "Claire, how could you do this to your brother, competing against your own family? Don't you see how this looks?" I smiled politely, sipping my wine. "No, Mom, I'm not competing with anyone. I'm just building something of my own." Her eyes narrowed, but I could tell she didn't understand. She never did. The townspeople had mixed reactions. Some whispered that I was heartless, driven by revenge. Others quietly rooted for me, especially those who had worked under me before. Sarah, our loyal head housekeeper, left Mountain Pine after Ryan humiliated her one too many times. A week later, she walked into my new lobby with tears in her eyes and said, "If you'll have me, I'd love to work for you again." I didn't hesitate. "Welcome home," I said. From that day, the summit became more than a business. It became a sanctuary for people who had been dismissed, underestimated, or broken by someone else's ego. We built something special together, one floor at a time. When the grand opening finally came 6 months later, I could barely recognize the place. The worn-down lodge had transformed into a mountainside jewel, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, stone fireplaces crackling with warmth, soft music playing beneath the hum of happy voices. Our name, the summit, gleamed in gold above the entrance like a promise kept. The opening night was a blur of cameras, laughter, and quiet pride. The local newspaper came to cover it, and I still remember the exact moment my parents walked in. Mom's polite smile froze the instant she saw the full house. Dad's eyes widened, scanning the crowd, realizing this wasn't some petty side project, this was success. Real success. And Ryan? Oh, Ryan. He cornered me by the bar, his voice low and shaking. "You're trying to destroy us," he hissed. "This is a direct attack on our family." I met his glare calmly. "No, Ryan. This is me succeeding despite our family." For once, he didn't have a comeback. From that night on, the battle lines were drawn, silent but sharp. Within months, the summit became the talk of the region. Our eco-friendly initiatives made headlines. Travel influencers called it the future of boutique hospitality. Guests booked months in advance. Everything Ryan had rejected, from the upgraded spa to the farm-to-table restaurant concept, was now the cornerstone of our success. And the contrast between our hotels couldn't have been clearer. At Mountain Pine Lodge, guests complained about broken heating systems, long waits, and cold service. Their once charming rustic appeal had become outdated. Reviews dropped from 4 stars to 2. Meanwhile, the summit soared. But with every step upward, the whispers around town grew louder. "She's tearing her family apart. She's just bitter. Poor Ryan, he's trying his best." I'd be lying if I said those words didn't sting. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd gone too far. But then I'd think about Maria, about Sarah, about all the people Ryan had dismissed, and I'd remind myself I'm not the villain in this story. I'm the one who stopped being silent. Of course, my parents didn't see it that way. One morning, they showed up at my office unannounced. I still remember the look on Mom's face, a mixture of pride and desperation. "Claire," she said softly, "the bank is threatening to call Mountain Pines loans. Ryan's in trouble. We need your help." I looked at them for a long moment, feeling something inside me break and harden all at once. 8 months earlier, I would have dropped everything to save them. But now I saw the truth, that my loyalty had always been one-sided. "I offered to help when it mattered," I said quietly. "You chose Ryan. You live with that choice." Dad's voice trembled. "Think about your grandfather's legacy. He built that hotel with his own hands." "And I tried to preserve that legacy," I replied. "You're the ones who handed it to someone who treats it like his personal playground." They didn't know what to say. Mom's lips trembled, her eyes glistening with something between anger and regret. But I didn't waver. For the first time in my life, I was done begging for their respect. The next week, the rumors exploded. Claire refused to help her family. People whispered that I was cold, that success had changed me. But you know what? Success didn't change me. It revealed me the version of myself I'd buried for decades beneath guilt and obedience. Every insult only made me stronger. Every whisper reminded me that I had built something on my own terms. And I wasn't finished yet, because the night of the Colorado Luxury Hotel Awards was approaching, and none of us could have imagined how that evening would change everything. The night of the Colorado Luxury Hotels Awards felt like the culmination of every sleepless night, every tear shed in silence, every sacrifice I had made to build the summit. The ballroom shimmered beneath golden chandeliers. Dozens of hotel owners, travel editors, and industry elites gathered in their finest evening wear. The air buzzed with polished laughter and expensive perfume, a room full of people who once wouldn't have given me a second glance. But tonight they were here to see me. I sat at a round table surrounded by my team, the people who had believed in me when no one else did. Sarah sat to my right, wearing a deep navy dress, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "No matter what happens tonight," she whispered, "you've already won, Claire." Her words made my throat tighten. She was right. I had already won, not because of an award, but because I had finally built something that no one could take away. When the announcer's voice echoed across the hall and the nominees for Best New Boutique Hotel are, I held my breath. They listed the names one by one, and then the summit, Aspen, Colorado. A ripple of applause filled the room. I caught sight of movement near the back, and my heart stuttered. My parents, they had shown up uninvited. Mom's posture was stiff, her smile brittle. Dad looked tired, older, as if the weight of Ryan's failures had carved new lines across his face. For a moment, I almost pitied them, almost. The presenter paused dramatically before announcing the winner. And this year's award for Best New Boutique Hotel goes to the Summit. The room erupted in cheers. My team jumped to their feet, clapping and hugging. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I stood trembling, a strange calm spreading through me. As I walked toward the stage, every step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I had lost years ago. The lights were blinding, but I could see my parents in the back, frozen, expressionless. When I reached the microphone, I took a deep breath. "Thank you." I began softly, my voice trembling but steady. A year ago, I was told I wasn't ready to lead, that I was too detail-oriented. A few people chuckled, but sometimes the details are what makes something extraordinary. The crowd applauded. I want to thank my incredible team, the people who turned long nights and endless challenges into something beautiful. And I also want to thank the place where I first fell in love with hospitality, Mountain Pine Lodge. A murmur ran through the audience. I didn't need to look to know my parents had gone pale. Because sometimes I continued, the hardest experiences are the ones that teach us who we truly are. When I stepped off the stage, a travel magazine editor approached me almost immediately. "Claire, that speech, wow. You have a story the world needs to hear. Would you be open to an interview?" I smiled. "I think I'm finally ready to tell it." And I meant it. Later that evening, the editor sat with me in the corner of the ballroom, notebook in hand, asking about the inspiration behind the summit. I spoke openly about being overlooked, about starting from nothing, about turning pain into purpose. As I talked, I noticed my parents standing a few feet away, pretending to mingle, but clearly listening. They heard every word as I said, "Sometimes the best success stories come from being underestimated." The editor laughed, jotting it down. "That's a perfect quote." It was because it was the truth. A few weeks later, the magazine issue hit shelves across the region. On the cover, a sweeping photo of the summit glowing under the golden sunset. The headline, "The Woman Who Redefined Mountain Hospitality." Inside, a two-page spread told my story, and beside it, a contrasting feature titled, "The Old Guard Struggle to Adapt," featuring none other than Mountain Pine Lodge. When I saw it, I felt both pride and heartbreak. Pride because the world finally saw what I had built. Heartbreak because my family's downfall was printed for everyone to read. That day, I didn't gloat. I didn't call Ryan. I didn't send the article to my parents. I simply folded the magazine, placed it on my office desk, and got back to work. Because for the first time, I wasn't doing any of this to prove them wrong. I was doing it to honor the woman I'd become. Weeks passed, and the summit flourished. The lobby buzzed with life guests chatting by the fireplace, staff moving gracefully between check-ins and coffee trays. Every morning, sunlight poured through the tall glass windows, illuminating the stone walls I had once scrubbed myself. It felt alive. Sarah often joked that our staff wasn't a team, it was a family. And in a way, she was right. Maria, who had been so humiliated by Ryan, now led our housekeeping department with pride. Every time I saw her smiling at guests, my heart swelled. They were thriving, we were thriving. But at night, when the hotel grew quiet, there were moments when I'd find myself staring out at the mountains thinking of my parents. I wondered if they ever understood why I had done what I did, if they realized how deeply their rejection had scarred me, and how paradoxically, it had also set me free. A few months later, they called. "Claire," Mom said hesitantly, "we'd like to have you over for dinner. Just us three." Her voice sounded different, smaller, fragile. For a moment, I considered saying no. But some part of me still hoped for closure, for something resembling reconciliation, so I agreed. When I arrived at their house, it felt strangely quiet. The walls that once echoed with arguments and laughter now seemed to absorb the silence. Mom greeted me with a nervous smile. Dad avoided eye contact, fiddling with his watch, a nervous tic I'd inherited. We made small talk at first. The weather, the town's ski season, the summit's glowing reviews. Then Dad cleared his throat. "Claire, we just want to say we're proud of what you've done." I studied their faces carefully. The words were kind, but they carried a weight, the kind that hides something else behind it. Mom nodded quickly. "We know we haven't always shown it, but we see it now. The summit is remarkable." I wanted those words to heal me. I really did. But they landed softly like snow melting before it touched the ground. Then came the real reason for the dinner. "Ryan's struggling," Mom said finally. "The hotel isn't doing well. He's in over his head. We were hoping you could maybe guide him, help us get things back on track." There it was, the familiar twist of disappointment. Not admiration, not reconciliation, need. For a moment, I stared at my plate, letting the silence stretch. Then I looked up, meeting their hopeful eyes. "I offered to help a year ago," I said gently. "You didn't want it then. You wanted Ryan. And now that everything's fallen apart, you want me to fix it?" My voice didn't shake. It was calm, measured, but final. "I'll give you advice if you want it," I continued. "I can recommend consultants, suppliers, even staff training programs. But I'm not coming back to clean up Ryan's mess. That's not my responsibility anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad nodded slowly, eyes heavy with resignation. Mom looked heartbroken, her lips trembling, but she didn't argue. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I'd never felt at that dinner table before: peace. On the drive home, the mountain air felt crisp and light. I rolled down my window, letting the cold wind wash over me. For so many years, I had carried the weight of their expectations, desperate for validation that would never come. But now I understood I didn't need it anymore. That night, I stood on the balcony of the summit, looking out at the lights glowing across the valley. Somewhere out there, Mountain Pine Lodge was still struggling to survive. But for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt freedom. The past didn't own me anymore. After that dinner, something inside me changed, not in anger, not even in triumph, but in quiet certainty. For years, I had lived as if my worth depended on my parents' recognition, as if their approval was the mirror through which I could finally see myself. But that night, when I walked away from their house without looking back, I realized I no longer needed their reflection to know who I was. Over the next few weeks, I noticed subtle shifts in my own behavior, small, almost invisible things that spoke volumes. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped over-explaining my choices. And for the first time in my life, I felt entirely, unapologetically free. At the summit, business was booming. Our occupancy rate had reached record highs. The waiting list for our spa stretched into next season. Travel bloggers called us the most soulfully designed retreat in the Rockies. Every morning, I'd walk into the lobby and feel a rush of pride. The smell of roasted coffee beans blended with the soft fragrance of cedar from our new furniture. Guests laughed near the fireplace, children played near the windows, and my staff, my family, moved gracefully, each one carrying the same quiet pride I did. Sometimes I'd catch Sarah at the front desk, chatting warmly with a guest, and I'd think of the years she spent under my brother's dismissive rules. Now she thrived. Her confidence radiated. She often joked, "Claire, I finally feel like I belong somewhere." And every time she said it, I'd smile because I knew exactly how that felt. We weren't just running a hotel, we were running a haven for the overlooked, the people who had once been told they weren't good enough. And that energy, that shared sense of purpose, made the summit feel alive in a way no building ever had before. But success didn't erase the ache of family. Some nights, when the world quieted and the mountains disappeared into darkness, I found myself thinking of my parents, of the childhood dinners filled with laughter, and the long silence that followed in later years. I didn't hate them. I never truly could. What I felt was more complicated, a mix of sadness, understanding, and release. It took me years to realize that love doesn't always mean trust, and family doesn't always mean fairness. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who can't see us clearly, not because they don't care, but because they refuse to see who we've become. About 2 months after that dinner, Mountain Pine Lodge finally made the local news, but not for anything good. A short article mentioned they were undergoing management restructuring after a series of financial setbacks. In simpler words, Ryan had failed. I wish I could say I felt satisfaction. I didn't. What I felt was a strange emptiness followed by quiet compassion. I knew what it was like to fight for something you couldn't save. The difference was I'd learned when to stop trying to earn love that was conditional. One crisp winter morning, I stood by the large panoramic windows of the summit as sunlight poured over the peaks. The mountains glowed gold at the edges, the sky a deep, endless blue. It was the same view Mountain Pine once advertised in its brochures, the same view my family never believed I could turn into something greater. And yet here I was, watching it from a place I built with my own 2 hands. That morning, I received an email from the Regional Hospitality Board. Subject line: Nominee, Announcement, Boutique Hotel of the Year. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. And there it was. The summit nominated again, this time alongside some of the biggest names in Colorado hospitality. I closed my laptop slowly and smiled. It wasn't about beating anyone anymore. It was about becoming everything they said I couldn't be. In the following weeks, the anticipation built quietly. My team worked harder than ever, not out of pressure, but out of pride. When I walked through the hallways, I saw them decorating the lobby with winter wreaths, setting up a charity donation box for the local animal shelter, and laughing together like old friends. We weren't just succeeding, we were thriving. One evening, as the sky dimmed into soft purples and blues, Sarah approached me with 2 cups of tea. She handed me one, smiling. "You ever think about how far you've come?" I laughed softly. "Every day." We stood there together, watching the snow fall gently beyond the glass, the lights of Aspen twinkling in the distance. It was peaceful. It was home. But deep down, I knew another chapter was about to close, and this one would be written in the glow of that final ceremony. The Regional Hospitality Awards took place in early spring. I arrived wearing a navy gown, simple and elegant. I wasn't trying to impress anyone, not anymore. I just wanted to be present. The ballroom buzzed with familiar faces, editors, executives, even a few of my old Chicago colleagues who had come to see what the Aspen Miracle was all about. And then near the back of the room, I saw them again. Mom, Dad. This time there was no bitterness in me, no resentment, just calm acceptance. They were part of my story, but no longer the authors of it. The announcer took the stage, his voice ringing across the hall. "And the nominees for Boutique Hotel of the Year are..." He listed them one by one. My pulse quickened slightly, but I kept breathing steady and still. Then came the words that froze time itself. "And the winner is..." The summit. The room erupted into applause, louder, brighter than before. I turned toward my team, who were cheering wildly, tears glistening in their eyes. Sarah grabbed my hand. "Go get it, boss," she whispered. As I walked to the stage, the lights shimmered and the music swelled. I caught sight of my parents once more. Dad gave me a small nod, a gesture of quiet pride. Mom's eyes glistened with tears she couldn't hide. It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement, and that was enough. When I reached the podium, I felt a strange calm settle over me. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady, heartfelt. "This award isn't just about hospitality, it's about resilience, about believing in yourself even when no one else does, I paused, scanning the audience faces of friends, strangers, and family who had all shaped this journey. There was a time I thought success meant being seen by others. But now I know it means seeing yourself clearly, even when the world refuses to. The room fell silent. Then came a wave of applause that seemed to echo forever. When the ceremony ended, I didn't rush to my parents. They didn't rush to me. And that was okay. Some things don't need to be said. Some peace comes quietly, not through reconciliation, but through release. Later that night, my team and I celebrated with champagne in the Summit's restaurant. Laughter filled the air, bouncing off the walls I had once painted myself. As the celebration roared on, I slipped away to the balcony for a moment of quiet. The night sky stretched endless above me, the same stars that once witnessed my heartbreak now shining on my triumph. I breathed deeply, the cold air stinging my lungs, the wind brushing my hair like a whisper of closure. For so long, I had chased validation like oxygen. But standing there under the stars, I realized I had already found everything I was looking for, not in their approval, but in my own peace. This was more than revenge. This was redemption. The morning after the award ceremony, I woke up before sunrise. The air in my suite at the summit was still and golden, the kind of quiet that only exists before the world starts moving. I wrapped myself in a robe and walked barefoot to the balcony, a cup of coffee warming my hands. The view stretched endlessly before me. Mountain peaks dipped in silver mist, the first rays of light painting the valley below. It was breathtaking. And for the first time in my entire life, it didn't just feel like a view of success. It felt like a view of peace. I thought back to the woman I'd been a year ago, desperate for approval, breaking my back to prove I was worthy of love that kept slipping through my fingers. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who no longer needed permission to exist. The summit was thriving more than I ever dreamed. Guests left glowing reviews, travel editors sent constant requests for interviews, and luxury blogs called it the beating heart of Aspen's new era. Every corridor, every room, every corner of this hotel carried my fingerprints, the scent of resilience, the quiet hum of self-respect. But beyond the accolades, beyond the numbers, something deeper had shifted inside me. The drive that once came from pain had softened into purpose. I wasn't running from rejection anymore. I was walking toward fulfillment. One afternoon, a few weeks after the awards, I found Sarah in the lobby arranging a bouquet of wildflowers. She looked up with that familiar twinkle in her eyes and said, "You realize what you've built, right? This place, it's more than a hotel. It's healing people." Her words caught me off guard. I smiled softly, blinking back tears. Maybe it's healing me too. Because it was true. Every guest who walked through these doors brought a story, a heartbreak, a fresh start. And in caring for them, I was learning to care for myself, something I'd neglected for far too long. Still, there were moments when I thought about my family. Sometimes I'd drive past Mountain Pine Lodge on my way home. It still stood weathered and quiet, like a ghost of who I used to be. The sign out front was faded now. The once busy parking lot was nearly empty. I heard through the grapevine that my parents had finally brought in a professional consultant to try to turn things around. Ryan was still technically in charge, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. He avoided public appearances, barely spoke to anyone in town. A part of me wished him well, truly, because I'd learned something profound in all of this. Revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about rebuilding yourself so beautifully that the people who once doubted you can't look away, not out of envy, but out of realization. I didn't need Ryan to fail for me to win. I just needed to stop shrinking so he could shine. And now I was finally standing in my own light. That winter, we hosted a charity gala at the summit, raising funds for the local animal shelter. The ballroom glowed with laughter and music, guests clinking glasses under chandeliers that reflected like captured stars. At one point, I stood near the entrance, watching everyone, the families, the staff, the guests, all smiling, all alive with joy. And I realized I had created what my childhood had always lacked, a place where people were seen, valued, and appreciated. A place where no one had to fight for love or recognition. Later that evening, as the event wound down, I slipped outside into the cold. The mountains towered against the night sky, timeless and still. I looked up, exhaled, and whispered to the wind, "Thank you." It wasn't a thank you to anyone in particular. It was to life itself, for the pain, the lessons, the strength the endings that made way for beginnings. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from my father. Inside was a short note written in his neat, deliberate handwriting. Claire, your mother and I read the article about the summit. We finally understand what you were trying to do all those years ago. We're sorry we didn't see it sooner. We may not know how to fix everything, but we want you to know we're proud of you. Love, Dad. I sat in my office for a long time staring at the paper. It wasn't the grand apology I once dreamed of, but it was real, and it was enough. I didn't call them right away. I didn't rush to bridge the gap. Instead, I folded the letter gently and tucked it into my desk drawer next to the first keycard ever printed for the summit. Two symbols of everything I had fought for, recognition and independence, now resting side by side. The next morning, as the sun poured into the lobby, I walked through the summit like I always did, greeting staff, chatting with guests, straightening a vase of flowers that had tilted slightly on the front desk. Sarah caught me doing it and laughed. "You'll never stop adjusting the details, will you?" I grinned. "That's what makes everything perfect." Outside, a young couple was checking out. The woman turned to me and said, "We're coming back next year. This place feels like home." Her words hit me like a warm wave, because that's all I had ever wanted, to create a home. Not just for others, but for myself. Later that day, I stood once more on the balcony overlooking the valley. The wind was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and snow. Below me, life moved on, cars, laughter, distant music. And I thought of everything that had brought me here, the pain, the betrayal, the long nights when I doubted myself. All of it had shaped me, refined me, and led me to this exact moment. I realized something then, something I wish I could tell the woman I used to be. Sometimes losing everything you thought you needed is the only way to find what you truly deserve. When I first came back to save my family's hotel, I thought I was rebuilding a legacy. But what I really rebuilt was myself. And that's the greatest success story I'll ever tell. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever poured your heart into something only to be pushed aside, I hope my story reminds you of this. Your value doesn't disappear just because someone else refuses to see it. Keep building, keep believing, keep standing in your own light. Because one day you'll look back and realize the mountain you climbed was never theirs. It was always yours. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps me bring more real, emotional stories like this to life. Let me know in the comments what moment resonated with you the most. And remember, sometimes the quietest victories are the loudest in the soul.